Do trade unions have too much power in South Africa? Well, joining me to discuss this topic is Phumlani Majozi, who thinks that they do. Phumlani is a senior fellow at African Liberty and a well-known writer and commentator in South Africa. Phumlani, welcome to the CRA channel. Could you give us an understanding of why you think trade unions have too much power in South Africa, and what are the consequences of that?
Well, no doubt that in South Africa, labor unions they are very, very powerful, right? When you look at the public sector, that's where you see a lot of unions being active. Employees there are members of unions. And you can see the fact that they shape how government is sort of setting public policy. I mean, it's quite clear. When you look at just a quick example, when you look at what happened this year with respect to COVID-19, when you look at the time, I think it was around June, where the president basically decided to shut down schools, when in fact it was determined that the COVID-19 spread isn't too risky in schools. But the president went ahead and shut down the schools. And it turns out that there was a lot of pressure from the teachers' union, SADTU basically, to be precise, to pressure the government so that they close schools because SADTU fear that their members were going to contract the disease. So there's so much that's going on. We've seen in South Africa where unions are pushing back against pro-market reforms. We've seen COSATU speaking sort of strongly against even the unbundling of Eskom, right? Unbundling it into three entities as proposed by our government. So they still have a huge influence in the country, and you can see how they shape politics, especially the politics of the current ruling party, which is the ANC. We see a lot of a push there so that government does what these unions want. And we do see pressure, because if this government doesn't do what these unions want, there are some threats that we're not going to vote for you, we're not going to get you back into power, right? So that shaping of policy, the power of unions, is there, it's alive in South Africa, and it's something that we have to deal with as a country.
So Phumlani, you've outlined how trade unions have an exaggerated political role in South Africa, but what is the effect that this has on the labor market, and particularly given our very high levels of unemployment in South Africa?
Well, you see, one of the things that we need to understand is that our unions are very much opposed to the opening and the freeing of the labor market, right? They support the minimum wage laws. I mean, one thing we need to be honest about, research has been done on this, and that is the labor costs in South Africa, in the labor market. They are quite high. They are high compared to many emerging markets in the world. And we need to address those things. And guess what? The unions are pushing back even on the basics around that. There has been many regulations, the labor market, we have seen over the past sort of 2 decades or so in South Africa. And if you want to free those the labor regulations, the unions push back against that. So what's the cost? The main cost is that you end up having the millions of people in South Africa who cannot find employment, right? Right now, unemployment rate, or I should say people who are unemployed, the number of people who are unemployed, it's gone up to more than 11 million, right? Which is shocking even by global standards. So you can't. This is what the ANC has been doing over the past years. Whenever they talk about reform in South Africa, they always run away from talking about the labor market reform, which include liberalizing the market, the market, removing things like minimum wage laws, right? Addressing the labor cost. They always run away from that because they know that the unions will fight very hard so that those regulations are not removed. And the cost is basically a situation where you have millions of people struggling to find unemployment. And in fact, unemployment rising, which is hurting us as a country.
So Phumlani, obviously the right to unionize is very important, and people can freely associate and join unions if they wish. But I think the consequence, as you've outlined, is that the political nature of unions in South Africa, the fact that they're in a formal alliance with the government, means that there is a conflict of interests, and that essentially what you have is a labor aristocracy in South Africa that protects existing workers at the expense of the unemployed. Could you give us a sense of also what alternatives could we see being put on the table in terms of policy that could unlock South Africa's labor market and also push back against this power of the trade unions?
Let me make this clear, David. I am for freedom of association, right? I don't believe unions should be banned. And I need to make that quite very, very clear, right? People have a right to mobilize for whatever reason, so long as they don't mobilize for the incitement of violence or to promote hate or something like that. So unions, they should exist in our democracy. They should represent their members. The big problem begins when we have politicians or government that sleeps on the same bed with them, right? Because the moment that happens, that means you are not going to see the fundamental reforms, the wide-ranging reforms that are aimed at uplifting the general society, right? You would struggle to do that because unions are going to push back. Now, your question was, what are the alternatives we could sort of put in place to address the issue? You see, I said this on one radio show the other day, that the only way you can resolve this in South Africa is we need the current ruling party out of power, right? Because it sleeps on the same bed with unions. So that's the first step if you want to address the issue, that you would need to have a party that is, you need to have a governing party that is not aligned with labor unions. So remove the current ruling party and put in people who are not sort of very much aligned to labor unions, who will put the interests of the general public, front and center. So that would be the first step. So now, what are the policy kind of fundamental things that could be done to address the issue? I think the minimum wage is not necessary, right? In a country that has a massive, shocking unemployment. So we need to lift that up. The Labor Relations Act needs to be looked into. I've had people who have said, since the Labor Relations Act became active, they've hired less people. The impact has been huge on their businesses. So we need to look into that and also liberalize it, free it up, remove the too much red tape that is found in that legislation. The labor costs, they need to be looked into, right? And need to think, the state or policymakers need to think about what is it that is raising labor costs and how do you reduce it? Because if you have high labor costs, you are not going to have people from various countries coming to invest here, right? Because it's just expensive to hire our employees, right? Or to hire our people. So we need to address those fundamental things when it comes to the labor market. So it's a matter that will take some form of politics, but also it will also require, of course, the public policy sort of amendments or sort of fundamental things that will need to be done so that we are able to sort of free the market up and basically, attract more people and reduce these sort of shocking unemployment levels that we have right now.
Well, thank you, Phumlani. I certainly hope that some of these policy changes are implemented. My name is David Ansara. Please remember, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and check out the link in the description below to our 30-day free trial. Also, let us know what you think. Do you think that trade unions have too much power in South Africa? Until next time, take care.